Every dog in the auction yard froze. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe loyalty can outlive time itself, take a second to subscribe, because this story may change the way you see both heroes and dogs forever. The November air carried the sharp scent of rain-soaked pine across the retired K9 auction grounds outside Norfolk, Virginia. Gray clouds drifted low over rows of chain-link kennels, and a cold wind rattled the faded banners hanging above the sale ring. Most people came here looking for bargains. Retired working dogs, old service animals, forgotten partners from careers the public rarely understood. Men in heavy jackets walked slowly between the kennels, reading tags and checking paperwork. A few families wandered through the crowd. Some smiled, some pointed, some simply looked curious. But none of them noticed the girl until she was already halfway through the gate. She couldn't have been older than 13. Her name was Emily Carter. She walked alone. No parent, no friend, no one holding her hand. Just a small backpack hanging from one shoulder and a silver chain resting against her sweater. The chain disappeared beneath the fabric, but every few steps she reached up and touched it, as if making sure it was still there. The security guard near the entrance watched her approach. "You here with somebody?" he asked gently. Emily glanced back toward the gravel parking lot, where her grandmother's old Buick sat near the fence with its hazard lights blinking softly in the mist. Her grandmother had signed the visitor waiver at the office and promised to wait, but Emily had asked to walk the first row alone. Some grief was too private to carry in front of another person. "My grandma is right outside," Emily said. "She knows I'm here." The guard studied her for a moment, then looked toward the car. "You stay where staff can see you," he said. "This place gets busy once bidding starts." Emily nodded. "Yes, sir. I won't be long." Something in her voice made him step aside. Not confidence, not stubbornness. Something older, like she had already carried more weight than most. Adults. She continued walking past kennel after kennel. German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Labrador Retrievers with gray around their muzzles. Dogs that had spent years serving beside soldiers, officers, handlers, and trainers. Some lay quietly. Some paced. Some barely lifted their heads. Retirement had not been kind to all of them. Yet Emily wasn't looking at any particular dog. She seemed to be searching for something else entirely. The auctioneer's microphone crackled overhead. Buyers gathered near the main ring. Metal chairs scraped across concrete. Somewhere in the distance a flag snapped against its pole. Then Emily stopped, right in the center of the aisle, her eyes fixed on a row of aging German Shepherds housed near the back fence. There were 7 of them. Old dogs, scarred dogs, dogs whose best years were long behind them. One lay sleeping. Another stared blankly toward the horizon. A third rested his chin on crossed paws. None appeared interested in the crowd. Emily swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the chain beneath her sweater. For a moment, it looked as though she might turn around and leave. As though whatever brought her here suddenly felt too heavy. Then she took a slow breath. The wind moved through the yard. A loose sign creaked overhead. Somewhere a truck engine started. And Emily spoke. Just 3 words. Quietly. Softly. Barely above a whisper. "Blackwater 7 lives." The effect was immediate. The sleeping shepherd's head snapped upward. Another dog rose to his feet, so suddenly his food bowl tipped over. A third froze mid-step. Ears lifted. Eyes widened. One by one, all 7 German Shepherds turned toward the girl. The conversations around the yard slowly faded. Buyers stopped walking. Trainers looked up from clipboards. Even the auctioneer lowered his microphone. Nobody understood what had happened. Emily stood motionless. The dogs stared at her with an intensity that made the air feel different somehow. Heavier. Stranger. One of the oldest shepherds stepped forward until his nose pressed against the kennel gate. His muzzle had gone silver with age. His eyes were cloudy, yet something inside them seemed to ignite. Recognition. Memory. Hope. The old dog let out a sound unlike a bark. It was softer, almost like a cry carried across years instead of distance. Emily's eyes immediately filled with tears. She recognized him from photographs. Rex, the legendary K9 her father had served beside. The dog everyone believed had forgotten the past long ago. Yet Rex never took his eyes off her. Not for a second. Around them, the entire yard stood silent. Because somehow, impossibly, every retired military dog in that row was now staring at the same child. and none of them seemed willing to look away. What nobody in the auction yard knew was that Emily Carter had spent the last 6 months chasing a mystery hidden inside a worn leather journal left behind by a Navy SEAL who never came home. A mystery connected to those 3 words. Blackwater 7. A name buried so deeply that it was never supposed to be spoken again. And the man at the center of it all was her father, Lieutenant Noah Carter. The name settled over the auction yard like a church bell echoing through fog. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Emily stood frozen beneath the gray Virginia sky while Rex remained pressed against the kennel gate, his amber eyes locked onto hers. Those eyes were old now, older than any working dog should have been. Yet behind the silver fur and tired joints lived something powerful, something memory had refused to surrender. The retired handler beside the kennel slowly removed his cap. His weathered face had gone pale. "Where did you hear those words?" he asked quietly. Emily looked at him, but did not answer right away. Her fingers closed around the silver chain beneath her sweater. The dog tags hidden there felt warm despite the cold. One tag belonged to her father. The other had belonged to Rex. They had never been separated until the day Lieutenant Noah Carter disappeared. 9 years earlier, Noah Carter had been one of the most respected Navy SEAL K-9 handlers on the East Coast. Tall, disciplined, and calm under pressure, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who never needed attention. His skin was weathered by years of training beneath open skies. A German Shepherd tattoo rested along the left side of his neck, partially hidden beneath his collar. People remembered the tattoo because it matched the dog who never left his side. Rex had been more than a partner, more than a working dog. Together, they had become a legend throughout the training commands. New recruits heard stories about them before they ever arrived. Older operators spoke their names with respect. Wherever Noah went, Rex followed. Wherever Rex stopped, Noah listened. Emily barely remembered those years. She had only been 4 when her father vanished. Most of her memories were small fragments. A deep laugh, strong arms lifting her onto broad shoulders. The smell of ocean air mixed with coffee when he came home after long deployments. She remembered sitting beside him on the porch one summer evening while Rex rested at his feet. Fireflies drifted across the yard. The world had felt safe then, permanent, as if nothing could ever be taken away. But life rarely asks permission before changing. After Noah disappeared, the Navy searched. Weeks became months. Months became years. Reports were written. Files were closed. Eventually, the official words arrived. Missing. Presumed lost. Emily's mother stopped talking about him. Photographs disappeared into boxes. The uniform was folded away. Friends stopped visiting. The world moved forward. Everyone except Emily. As she grew older, questions replaced memories. Questions nobody seemed willing to answer. Then 6 months ago, everything changed. It happened inside the attic of her grandmother's house in Chesapeake. Rain hammered against the roof that afternoon while Emily searched through dusty storage bins. She had been looking for old family photographs. Instead, she found a leather journal hidden inside a military footlocker. The cover was worn. Salt stains marked the edges. Her father's name was embossed across the front. Noah Carter. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Most of the pages contained ordinary entries. Training schedules, weather notes, thoughts about family, stories about Rex. But near the back she discovered something strange. Entire pages had been removed. Others were covered in black ink. Names erased. Dates hidden. Only fragments remained. A sentence here. A phrase there. Pieces of a puzzle missing its center. Then she reached the final page. There, written in careful handwriting, was a single message. If anything happens to me, tell them Blackwater 7 lives. Nothing else. No explanation. No location. No names. Just those 4 words. Emily spent months trying to understand them. She searched military records, library archives, online databases. She asked veterans, historians, retired sailors. Nobody recognized the phrase. It was as though the words existed outside history itself. Until today. Until the moment she spoke them aloud and 7 retired military dogs reacted as if someone had awakened a sleeping part of their souls. The handler stared at her, his eyes shining with emotions he could no longer hide. Beyond the kennels, several former service members had quietly gathered. None of them looked confused anymore. They looked haunted. One elderly man took a slow step forward. His Marine Corps jacket hung loose on his thin frame. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I never thought I would hear those words again. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Around her, the dogs remained standing, waiting, watching, especially Rex. The old German shepherd had not looked away once. Then, for the first time, Rex turned his head and glanced toward the far end of the kennel row, toward a locked storage building standing alone beneath the dark clouds. A building no visitor was supposed to enter. And as Emily followed his gaze, she noticed something that made her breath catch. Rex was not simply remembering the past. He was trying to show her something. Emily could not explain why her feet started moving before anyone gave permission. Perhaps it was the way Rex stared toward the storage building. Perhaps it was the strange certainty growing inside her chest. Whatever the reason, she found herself walking along the kennel row while the old German shepherd followed her every movement with unwavering focus. The retired handler hesitated, then stepped beside her. Several veterans exchanged nervous glances before quietly trailing behind. The storage building sat near the edge of the property where tall pine trees swayed against the darkening sky. It was an ordinary structure from a distance. Weathered siding, faded paint, a rusted lock hanging from the door. Yet the closer Emily came, the more unusual the silence felt. Even the auction noise seemed distant now, swallowed by the wind and the scent of approaching rain. Rex began pacing inside his kennel. Not frantically, purposefully, back and forth, back and forth. His ears remained fixed toward the building. The handler noticed it too. I have not seen him act like this in years, he murmured. Not since Noah. Hearing her father's name spoken aloud sent a chill through Emily. Most people avoided it. They spoke about him in careful tones, as though mentioning him might reopen wounds that never truly healed. But these men remembered him differently. Not as a photograph, not as a folded flag, as a living person, as someone whose presence still lingered among them. The elderly Marine who had recognized the phrase Blackwater 7 slowly approached the building. His name, Emily learned, was Walter Briggs. Age had bent his shoulders, but not his memory. He removed a ring of keys from his pocket and stared at the lock for several seconds. This place was supposed to stay closed, he said quietly. No one answered. Walter inserted the key. The lock clicked. A gust of cold air pushed through the trees. The door creaked open. Dust floated through narrow shafts of gray light. At first glance the room appeared unremarkable. Metal shelves lined the walls. Old training equipment sat beneath canvas covers. Storage crates occupied the corners. Yet every object seemed frozen in time, as though someone had walked away years ago expecting to return the next morning. Emily stepped inside. The scent of aged paper and cedar wood filled the air. Her eyes adjusted slowly. Then she saw it. Near the back wall stood a large display case, covered by a protective cloth. Walter swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled the cover away. The room fell silent. Inside the case rested dozens of photographs. Training certificates, unit patches, commendation plaques, memories preserved. Behind glass, at the center was a photograph larger than all the others. Emily's breath caught. It showed a younger Noah Carter kneeling beside Rex beneath a bright Carolina sky. Her father looked exactly as she remembered from the few pictures still hanging in her grandmother's house. Strong jaw, kind eyes, navy haircut, and there, partially visible above his collar, was the German shepherd tattoo. Rex stared directly at the camera while Noah rested a hand against his shoulder. Neither appeared heroic. Neither appeared larger than life. They simply looked happy. Emily slowly stepped closer. Tears blurred her vision. Dad, she whispered. Beside the photograph sat a small bronze plaque. It read, Blackwater 7K9 Task Unit. Service above self. Honor without recognition. Emily stared at the words. For months she had searched for answers. Yet this was the first proof that Blackwater 7 had truly existed. It was not a code phrase. Not a myth. It had been real. Walter removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Most people never knew about this unit, he said. Officially, it was never discussed. The dogs came first. That was Noah's rule. He believed they deserved the same respect as every service member standing beside them. Emily listened carefully. Every word felt precious. Another veteran pointed toward a row of framed photographs. 7 dogs appeared in every image. Different locations. Different seasons. Same team. Same bond. Rex stood proudly in the center of each photograph. And always, somewhere nearby, was Noah, smiling, training, walking, watching over them. The handler suddenly knelt beside a storage chest beneath the display case. "This should not be here," he said. He brushed away a layer of dust. A name had been engraved into the wood. Noah Carter. Emily's heart began to race. Walter looked equally surprised. "I thought that was transferred years ago." The chest appeared untouched. The brass latch had darkened with age. No one seemed willing to open it. For several seconds they simply stared. Then, outside the building, a sound echoed through the quiet afternoon. A single bark. Deep. Familiar. Rex. Everyone turned toward the doorway. The old German shepherd was standing perfectly still inside his kennel, facing the building, waiting, as though he already knew what rested inside the chest bearing Noah Carter's name. No one reached for the chest at first. The room seemed to hold its breath around it. Dust drifted lazily through the pale light coming from the high windows, while the scent of old wood and forgotten years lingered in the air. Outside, another bark echoed from Rex. Short, certain, not a demand, a reminder. Emily stepped closer. The engraved name on the lid looked almost unreal beneath her fingertips. Noah Carter. For years she had searched for traces of her father. Photographs, stories, newspaper clippings, fragments. Yet this chest felt different. Personal, untouched, as though part of him had been waiting here all along. Walter Briggs finally exhaled. "Go ahead, kid," he said softly. "I think it belongs to you more than anyone else." Emily knelt beside the chest. The brass latch resisted at first, stiff from years without movement. Then, with a quiet click, it released. The sound seemed impossibly loud inside the room. Slowly she lifted the lid. A faint smell of cedar and sea air escaped from within. The contents were neatly arranged, preserved with extraordinary care. On top rested a folded Navy flag. Beneath it sat photographs, training journals, service patches, and a worn leather collar. Emily immediately recognized the collar. Rex's. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. The leather had faded with age, but the nameplate remained intact. Rex. She imagined her father's hands fastening it years ago. She imagined early mornings, training fields, ocean wind, and a younger dog standing proudly beside him. The room remained silent. Even the veterans seemed reluctant to interrupt the moment. Then Emily noticed something tucked beneath the collar. A small envelope, yellowed with age. Her heartbeat quickened. Across the front, written in careful handwriting, were only 3 words. "For Emily." She froze. Walter removed his cap again. One of the handlers quietly wiped his eyes. Nobody spoke. Emily stared at the envelope for several long seconds before opening it. Inside was a single folded page. Her father's handwriting filled every line. The sight alone nearly stole her breath. She had not seen his writing since she was a little girl. "Dear Emily, if you are reading this, then life has probably taken a path neither of us expected. I wish I could tell you exactly how this story ends. The truth is, I never knew. But there are things I need you to understand. First, never measure a life by how long someone stays. Measure it by how much love they leave behind. If you ever doubt that, look at Rex. He taught me more about loyalty than any school, any training course, or any mission ever could." Emily paused. Her vision blurred. She swallowed hard and continued. "If Rex is still with you when you read this, then he has done exactly what I always believed he would do. He found his way back to family." The old German shepherd outside the building suddenly let out a soft whine, as though he somehow knew his name had been spoken. Several men exchanged astonished looks. Emily continued reading. "There is one more thing. If circumstances ever bring you here, do not stop searching after you find this letter. Blackwater 7 was never about the past. It was always about a promise. Everything you need is hidden where the 7 shadows meet the water at sunrise. Trust Rex. He remembers." Emily lowered the page. Confusion mixed with emotion. The room fell silent once again. "7 shadows meet the water," one handler whispered. Walter frowned deeply. The phrase clearly meant something to him. He walked slowly toward the display photographs and stared at one image in particular. His eyes widened. "Good Lord," he breathed. Emily followed his gaze. The photograph showed Noah standing with the 7K9s near a wooden dock somewhere along the Chesapeake shoreline. Behind them stretched 7 tall pilings casting long shadows across the water. Walter pointed toward the image. "That location," he said quietly. "I know exactly where that is." The veterans turned toward him. It is an old training site about 30 miles from here. It was abandoned years ago. Emily felt her pulse quicken again. The letter suddenly seemed less like a farewell and more like instructions. Something hidden, something unfinished, something her father had wanted her to find. Outside, the sky darkened further as distant thunder rolled beyond the trees. Rain would arrive soon, yet none of them seemed concerned about the weather anymore. Every thought centered on the same mystery. Walter slowly looked back toward Emily. "Kid," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "I think your father left you a trail." Before anyone could respond, Rex barked again, this time louder. Urgent. And when Emily looked through the open doorway toward the kennel row, she realized the old German shepherd was no longer facing the storage building. He was staring toward the parking lot, toward the road leading east, as if he already knew exactly where the next piece of the story was waiting. Before they left, Walter did something nobody expected. He walked back to the office trailer, spoke quietly with the event coordinator, and asked for Rex's file. The paperwork was thin for a life that had carried so much weight. Vaccination records, a retirement transfer form, a note about arthritis medication, a warning that the dog was unlikely to bond with a new family. Emily watched Walter sign as temporary guardian until her grandmother could complete the adoption documents with the county rescue program the next morning. No one argued. Not after what they had seen. Not after Rex pressed his nose against Emily's hand through the kennel gate and refused to move until she promised him, in a whisper, "I'm not leaving without you." The first drops of rain began falling as they left the auction grounds. They landed softly on windshields, pavement, and pine needles, turning the late afternoon air cool and fragrant. Emily sat in the passenger seat of Walter Briggs's aging pickup truck with the letter resting carefully in her lap. Beside them, two retired handlers followed in another vehicle. Behind them all, secured comfortably in a transport kennel lined with blankets, Rex rode quietly for the first time that day. Yet every few minutes the old German shepherd would lift his head and look east through the rear window. Always east. Always toward the same destination. The road wound through coastal Virginia beneath low clouds and fading daylight. Small fishing towns appeared and disappeared beyond the rain-speckled glass. White church steeples rose above clusters of trees. Weathered docks stretched into gray water. The Chesapeake Bay seemed endless beneath the stormy sky. Emily stared at her father's letter again. She had already read it 6 times during the drive. Every word felt heavier now. Trust Rex. He remembers. Those 3 words echoed through her thoughts. She glanced toward the back seat. Rex was awake, watching her. His amber eyes seemed softer than before, almost gentle, as though he understood exactly why she had come. Walter noticed the exchange and smiled faintly. "You know," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Your father used to say Rex remembered things better than most people." Emily looked over. "Really?" Walter nodded. One time a training marker got misplaced near the shoreline. Nobody could find it. Not the instructors. Not the handlers. 2 months later Rex walked straight back to the exact spot and sat down on it. A quiet laugh escaped him. No one ever won an argument against that dog. Emily smiled despite herself. It felt strange. Smiling. After so many years of questions. Yet somehow the presence of these men, and especially Rex, made her feel closer to her father than she had since childhood. Nearly 40 minutes later the convoy turned onto a narrow gravel road bordered by marsh grass and cedar trees. Rain drifted across the windshield in silver streaks. Walter slowed the truck. Ahead, beyond a rusted chain gate hanging partially open, stood an abandoned waterfront training site. Time had worn it down gently. Old buildings leaned slightly beneath years of salt air. Weathered docks extended into calm water. Tall wooden pilings rose from the shoreline like silent sentries. Emily's breath caught immediately. There were 7 of them. 7 massive pilings stretching into the bay. The same ones from the photograph. The same ones from the letter. Walter parked near the shoreline. Nobody spoke as they stepped out into the cool rain. Waves lapped quietly against the docks. Seagulls drifted overhead. Somewhere in the distance a buoy bell rang through the mist. Rex emerged from the transport kennel slowly. Age showed in every movement now. His joints were stiff, his muzzle silver. Yet the moment his paws touched the ground something changed. His posture straightened. His ears lifted. Purpose returned to him. He began walking toward the shoreline without hesitation. Not fast. Not excited. Certain. Emily followed closely. The others trailed behind. The old dog led them along the dock until they reached the final piling. There he stopped. Rain tapped softly against the wooden boards beneath their feet. Rex lowered his head, sniffed once, then sat. Everyone exchanged confused looks. Emily knelt beside him. "This is it," she whispered. Rex nudged something with his nose. A weathered metal box sat hidden beneath the dock supports, partially concealed behind a cluster of old rope and driftwood. Walter's eyes widened. That was not here before. One of the handlers carefully retrieved it. The box was small, rusted, heavy for its size. A simple latch secured the lid. No lock, no markings, just years of waiting. Emily's pulse quickened. Walter handed it to her. "I think your father intended for you to open this." Rain drummed softly across the water as Emily lifted the latch. Inside rested several waterproof envelopes, a folded map, and something wrapped in dark blue cloth. Her hands trembled. The first envelope carried a handwritten label. Blackwater 7. The second read Training Records. The third simply said Family. Emily stared at the final envelope. Family. The word alone felt enough to bring tears to her eyes. Then she noticed something else beneath the papers. A small silver object. She lifted it carefully. The world seemed to stop. It was a challenge coin. One side displayed the insignia of a Navy SEAL unit. The other carried an engraved message. Not all journeys end where others expect. Walter suddenly inhaled sharply. His face had gone pale. He stared not at the coin, but at the folded map beneath it. "No," he whispered. "That cannot be." Emily looked up. "What is it?" Walter slowly reached for the map. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The rain continued falling around. Then, while every face leaned closer, several locations had been circled in red ink. At the center of the map, written in Noah Carter's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words that made Walter's eyes fill with tears. "Last confirmed sighting here." Rain rolled across the bay in thin silver curtains while everyone stood frozen around the unfolded map. The water beyond the dock had turned dark beneath the gathering evening clouds, and the steady ringing of a distant buoy drifted through the mist like a forgotten memory. Emily stared at the words written in her father's handwriting. "Last confirmed sighting here." Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it. For 9 years, every official record had ended the same way. Missing. Presumed lost. Case closed. Yet the map in her hands suggested something very different. Walter carefully lowered himself onto a weathered bench near the dock. The old Marine looked shaken. Not frightened. Shaken in the way a man looks when a truth he buried long ago suddenly returns. He removed his glasses and studied the markings again. "This location," he said quietly. "It was never mentioned in any public report." One of the retired handlers leaned closer. "Then why would Noah write it down?" Walter did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the map. Finally, he looked toward Emily. Because he wanted someone he trusted to find it one day. The wind shifted. Beside them, Rex remained sitting near the dock pilings. His ears were forward, alert, watching the group with unusual focus. Emily noticed that every time someone touched the map, Rex paid attention. Every time they spoke about Noah, he listened. It was as if the old German shepherd understood he was witnessing the final pieces of a promise coming together. Emily carefully opened the envelope marked Blackwater 7. Inside, she found several waterproof pages filled with notes, training observations, locations, dates, handwritten comments about each dog in the unit. One passage immediately caught her attention. She read it aloud. The mission was never the objective. The team was. If circumstances change, bring them home. Silence followed. Walter slowly nodded. That sounds exactly like Noah. Emily continued reading. The notes described the 7 dogs not as assets or equipment, but as family. Every page carried small details. Favorite toys, habits, quirks. One dog loved tennis balls. Another hated thunderstorms. One always slept near doorways. Noah had documented everything. Not because he had been ordered to, because he cared. Tears filled Emily's eyes again. She realized something important in that moment. The real legacy her father left behind was not a classified file or a medal locked behind glass. It was personal. Love written into ordinary details. Loyalty recorded line by line. Then a folded photograph slipped from between the pages and landed gently against the dock boards. Emily picked it up. The image showed all 7 dogs gathered around Noah during sunrise. The same dock, the same pilings, the same shoreline. On the back, written in faded ink, was a short message. Some bonds survive distance. Some survive time. The strongest survive both. Walter looked away for a moment. The handlers stood quietly. Even the rain seemed softer now. Then Rex suddenly rose to his feet. Every head turned toward him. The old German shepherd walked past the group and headed farther down the dock. His movement was slow but deliberate. He stopped near the final section where several boards had warped with age. Then he looked back toward Emily. Once. Twice. Waiting. He wants us to follow, she whispered. Walter stood immediately. Nobody questioned it anymore. Over the course of the day, Rex had already led them to a hidden chest, a forgotten memorial, and a map nobody knew existed. If he believed something else remained hidden here, they were going to trust him. Together, they followed the aging dog toward the end of the dock. Rainwater shimmered across the wood beneath their feet. Waves lapped softly below. Rex stopped beside a weathered post wrapped in old rope. He lowered his nose and nudged the base of it. Emily knelt beside him. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then her fingers brushed against a narrow metal cylinder concealed behind the rope. Her breath caught. Carefully, she pulled it free. The container was waterproof and surprisingly well preserved. Someone had intentionally hidden it there. Walter stared in disbelief. Another message? Emily unscrewed the cap. Inside rested a tightly rolled sheet of paper. Nothing else. She carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Noah's. But unlike the letter she had already found, this note contained only one sentence. 8 simple words. Emily read them aloud. If Rex brought you here, keep believing. The group fell silent. No coordinates. No explanation. No instructions. Just those words. Yet something changed in the atmosphere around them. The note did not feel like a goodbye. It felt like encouragement. Like a hand reaching across years to steady someone moving through uncertainty. Emily looked at Rex. The old dog stepped closer and gently rested his head against her shoulder. For the first time all day, his body relaxed. The tension seemed to leave him. His eyes closed briefly as rain tapped softly against his fur. And in that quiet moment, standing beside the Chesapeake Bay beneath a darkening sky, Emily understood something her father had been trying to tell her from the beginning. The search was never about proving what happened 9 years ago. It was about discovering what remained. Faith, loyalty, family, and somewhere beyond the shoreline and unanswered questions, another piece of Noah Carter's story was still waiting to be found. The rain finally began to ease as evening settled across the Chesapeake shoreline. Dark clouds drifted farther out over the bay, leaving behind a sky painted in deep shades of blue and silver. The old dock glistened with moisture, and the scent of salt water lingered in the cooling air. Emily stood quietly beside Rex with the handwritten note still in her hands. If Rex brought you here, keep believing. The words felt simple, almost too simple. Yet the more she thought about them, the more they seemed to carry a weight far greater than their size. Her father had left clues across nearly a decade. Hidden letters, maps, memories, messages protected by time itself. He had trusted one companion above all others to preserve the trail. Not a vault, not a computer, a dog. Walter stared across the water for a long moment before speaking. You know what bothers me? He asked quietly. The handlers turned toward him. Noah planned all of this long before he disappeared. Emily looked down at the note again. Walter was right. None of these discoveries felt random. The chest, the letters, the hidden container beneath the dock. Every piece had been placed deliberately, as though Noah knew someday someone would come searching, as though he had prepared for this exact moment. One of the retired handlers unfolded the map again beneath the fading light. There is something we missed, he said. Everyone gathered around. The red circles marked several locations along the coast, but now that they examined the map more carefully, another detail became visible. Tiny handwritten symbols appeared beside each marked point. They were so faint they had almost disappeared with age. Emily leaned closer. Some resembled stars. Others looked like compass marks. Then her eyes landed on the final symbol. Her breath caught. Beside the location where they now stood was a small drawing of a German shepherd. Walter noticed it too. That cannot be a coincidence. Emily's pulse quickened. She followed the line connecting the symbols. One by one, they formed a pattern across the map. A path, not random locations. A route. The realization settled over the group like a sudden gust of wind. Noah had not left scattered clues. He had left directions. Rex slowly rose from beside Emily and walked a few feet down the dock. The old dog paused near the railing and stared toward the horizon. The setting sun briefly broke through the clouds, sending golden light across the bay. For an instant, everything seemed suspended between past and present. Emily watched the aging shepherd and felt tears gathering once more. 9 years. 9 years of carrying memories nobody else seemed willing to hold. Yet this dog had carried them too. Every day, every season, through retirement, through age, through countless quiet nights. Somehow Rex had never forgotten. Walter stepped beside her. Your father loved that dog. Emily smiled softly. I know. Walter shook his head. No, I do not think you understand. His voice grew gentler. Most handlers train dogs. Noah trusted them. There is a difference. Emily listened carefully. Walter pointed toward Rex. When Blackwater 7 was formed, everyone thought Noah was too attached to the dogs. They said he treated them like family. He paused and smiled sadly. Turns out he was right. Family is exactly what they were. The last rays of sunlight touched the water. The bay shimmered like molten gold. For the first time all day, peace seemed to settle over the group. Not because they had found answers, because they had found purpose. The search was no longer driven by loss. It was driven by connection. Then one of the handlers suddenly looked up from the map. Wait. His voice sharpened. There is writing here. Everyone moved closer. Along the bottom edge of the map, nearly hidden beneath a fold, appeared a sentence so faint it was almost invisible. Walter carefully tilted the paper toward the light. Slowly the words emerged. Emily read them aloud. When the path ends, find the lighthouse keeper. Silence followed. Nobody recognized the phrase. Nobody understood what it meant. Yet something in Walter's expression changed immediately. His eyes widened. Then he laughed softly in disbelief. Noah, he whispered. You stubborn old sailor. Emily turned toward him. You know what it means? Walter looked out toward the distant shoreline where a small lighthouse stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. Its beacon had just begun to glow. One steady light sweeping across the water. Again and again. Walter nodded slowly. I think I do. The old Marine looked toward the lighthouse, then toward Rex. The German shepherd was already watching it. His ears stood tall against the evening breeze, waiting, almost as if he had been expecting them to notice. Walter exhaled deeply. Kid, he said, his voice filled with wonder. I believe the next clue has been hiding in plain sight this entire time. The lighthouse beacon swept across the darkening bay like a slow heartbeat. Every few seconds its white light crossed the water, touched the shoreline, and disappeared into the growing night. Emily stood at the end of the old dock watching it in silence. The phrase from the map echoed in her mind. When the path ends, find the lighthouse keeper. The words sounded simple. Yet after everything they had discovered that day, she knew her father never wasted words. Walter checked his watch and looked toward the distant structure. The keeper still lives there, he said quietly. At least he did the last time I came through this area. One of the handlers raised an eyebrow. You know him? Walter nodded. Everybody around here knows him. His name is Henry Dawson. Retired Coast Guard. Lives alone. Been watching that lighthouse for decades. He paused and glanced toward Emily. The strange thing is that Henry and Noah knew each other. The air seemed to grow still around them. Emily's eyes widened. My father knew the lighthouse keeper? Walter nodded again. Not well, but they crossed paths many times during training operations along the bay. A new piece of the puzzle had appeared. Another connection. Another thread leading deeper into the story Noah had left behind. The group packed their belongings and made their way back toward the vehicles. Rex walked beside Emily the entire time. His pace was slower now. The long day was clearly taking its toll. Yet every time she looked down, she found him watching her with those steady amber eyes. The kind of eyes that seemed to say everything without speaking. The drive to the lighthouse took less than 20 minutes. Night had arrived. The road curved along the shoreline beneath towering cedar trees. Salt air drifted through the cracked windows. Waves whispered against rocks hidden in darkness. Ahead, the lighthouse stood atop a narrow point of land. Its white tower rose against the night sky like something from another century. Warm yellow light glowed from a small keeper's cottage nearby. Walter parked the truck. Nobody moved immediately. Something about the scene felt sacred, quiet, as though they were approaching the final chapter of a story written long ago. Finally, Emily opened the door and stepped out. Gravel crunched beneath her shoes. Rex followed. The old dog paused for a moment and lifted his nose into the breeze. Then something unexpected happened. His tail moved. Slowly at first. Then again. Walter noticed it immediately. I have not seen him do that all day. Emily smiled softly. Neither had she. They approached the cottage together. Light spilled from the windows onto the porch. The scent of coffee drifted through the cool night air. Before anyone could knock, the front door opened. An elderly man stood in the doorway. He appeared to be in his late 70s. Lean, weathered, strong despite his age. His silver beard caught the porch light. His blue eyes moved across the group calmly. Then they landed on Rex. Everything changed. The old man's expression froze. His breath caught. For several seconds he simply stared. Then his gaze shifted toward Emily. Toward the dog tags hanging from her neck. Toward the map in her hands. Toward the German shepherd standing faithfully at her side. Well, he whispered. I wondered how long it would take. Nobody spoke. Henry Dawson stepped aside and opened the door wider. You better come in. Inside, the cottage felt warm and welcoming. Books lined the shelves. Nautical charts covered portions of the walls. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner. Yet one object immediately captured Emily's attention. Hanging above the mantel was a framed photograph. Her father. Noah stood beside Henry near the lighthouse years earlier. Both men were smiling. Rex sat between them. Emily felt tears rising once more. Henry noticed her reaction and nodded gently. That photograph was taken 9 years ago. The room fell silent. 9 years. The same year Noah disappeared. Henry carefully lowered himself into a chair beside the fireplace. His gaze settled on Rex. The old German shepherd slowly crossed the room. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he rested his head against Henry's knee, like greeting an old friend. Henry's weathered hand trembled as he stroked the silver fur. Hello, old boy, he whispered. Emotion thickened his voice. You finally brought her. Emily's heart stopped. Brought her. Not found her. Not recognized her. Brought her. As though Rex had been carrying out a task all along. As though every clue, every hidden note, every step of the journey had been part of something Noah entrusted to him years before. Henry looked up at Emily. The firelight reflected in his eyes. There was sadness there, and wonder, and something else. Something that made her pulse quicken. Recognition. Your father left something with me, Henry said quietly. Something he told me to protect until the day his daughter arrived. The room became so quiet that Emily could hear the faint ticking of an old clock somewhere in the cottage. The fire crackled softly inside the stone fireplace, casting warm light across the shelves and photographs that filled the room. Outside, the lighthouse beam continued its slow journey across the dark bay. Henry Dawson rose carefully from his chair and crossed to a wooden cabinet standing near the far wall. Every movement seemed deliberate, reverent, as though he had repeated this moment in his mind for years. Rex watched him closely. The old German shepherd remained at Henry's side, his amber eyes calm and steady. Henry opened the cabinet and removed a long wooden box wrapped in a faded blue cloth. Time had softened the edges of the fabric. Dust rested lightly across its surface, yet it had clearly been protected with care. Henry carried it back to the table and placed it in front of Emily. For several seconds nobody spoke. The handlers exchanged quiet glances. Walter removed his cap once more. Emily stared at the box. Her hands trembled. My father left this, she whispered. Henry nodded. 9 years ago. His voice was soft. He told me one day a young girl would come looking for answers. He said she would not arrive alone. Henry smiled and looked toward Rex. Turns out he was right. Tears filled Emily's eyes. Slowly she unfolded the cloth. Beneath it rested a polished cedar box engraved with a simple inscription. For Emily. Always. Her breath caught. She carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay 3 items. A folded letter, a photograph, and a small bronze key attached to a silver chain. Emily picked up the photograph first. It showed Noah sitting beside Rex on a quiet beach during sunrise. There was no uniform, no military equipment, no mission, just a father smiling beside his best friend. On the back, written in familiar handwriting, were 6 words. The best days were simple ones. Emily pressed the photograph against her chest. For years she had feared losing memories of her father. Yet now, Through these gifts, she was discovering parts of him she had never known. Henry gestured toward the letter. That is the one he asked me to protect. Emily unfolded it carefully. The room fell silent once again. Dear Emily, if you are reading this, then you have already done something extraordinary. You kept searching, not because someone told you to, not because it was easy, but because love refused to let you quit. If there is one thing I hope you understand, it is this. Do not spend your life chasing ghosts. Spend it protecting what is still here. Family, friendship, kindness, loyalty. Those things matter more than answers, more than records, more than history. Emily paused as tears blurred the words. She took a breath and continued reading. I do not know how much time will pass before you find this letter, but I know Rex will do everything in his power to guide you here. He always finishes the mission. That was his gift. Not strength, not speed, faithfulness. If he is beside you now, then please give him a home. Give him a place to rest. He has earned it 1,000 times over. Emily lowered the letter and looked toward the aging German shepherd. Rex was already watching her. His tail moved gently against the floor. Then she noticed one final paragraph. Her voice shook as she read aloud. The greatest honor of my life was never the uniform. It was being your father. If the day ever comes when you feel alone, look beside you. Love leaves footprints. Sometimes they look like paw prints. By the time she finished, tears were streaming freely down her cheeks. Walter looked away. One of the handlers quietly wiped his eyes. Even Henry seemed overcome with emotion. For a long moment, nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. The journey had never been about discovering whether Noah Carter was alive or gone. It had been about finding what he left behind. And what he left behind was beautiful. Emily slowly set the letter down and knelt beside Rex. The old German shepherd stepped forward immediately. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his silver fur. Rex leaned gently against her shoulder. Neither moved. Neither needed to. Years of questions seemed to dissolve inside that single moment. Family had found family again. Outside, the lighthouse beams swept across the bay. Inside, the fire burned warmly. Henry smiled softly. Walter bowed his head, and Rex finally closed his eyes. Not with sadness, not with exhaustion, with peace. Later that night, as the stars appeared above the Chesapeake and the cottage settled into quiet stillness, Emily sat near the fireplace with Rex asleep beside her feet. One hand rested on her father's letter. The other rested gently on the old dog's back. For the first time in 9 years, she no longer felt lost. She had found it. Not a secret, not a mystery, something far more valuable. A promise kept, a bond remembered. By morning, the story had begun to travel through quiet calls among veterans, handlers, and old friends who had known Noah Carter. No headline could explain it properly. The truth lived in smaller things. Walter driving Emily and Rex back to Chesapeake before sunrise. Emily's grandmother opening the front door, recognizing Rex from a hidden photograph, and covering her mouth with both hands. Rex stepping inside the Carter house, circling once on the living room rug, and lying beneath the mantel as if he had only been gone for an afternoon. That week, Emily completed every form the rescue program required. Her grandmother bought an orthopedic bed and placed Rex's arthritis medicine beside the kitchen sink. Walter visited often, bringing stories about Noah that Emily had never heard. Henry mailed the lighthouse photograph. The retired handlers sent Rex's records and the names of the other dogs from Blackwater 7, so none of them would vanish into silence again. Months later, when spring warmed the Chesapeake air, Emily still wore her father's dog tags. But she no longer touched them out of fear that the past might disappear. She touched them with gratitude. Rex walked slower by then, and some days he needed help rising from his bed. But every evening, he followed Emily onto the porch and rested his head against her knee while she read from Noah's journal. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she laughed. Little by little, the house that had spent 9 years holding its breath felt alive again. Emily never found every answer about her father. Maybe no one ever would. But she learned that love does not always return as an explanation. Sometimes it returns as a tired old dog standing at a gate, remembering a voice, a promise, and a child he had been waiting half his life to find. And the quiet miracle of a loyal heart that never forgot the way home.